And here with more on the situation currently playing out in the region is Dr. Walid Phares, a renowned Middle East expert. He's with us now from Washington, D.C. He's the author of the book, The Lost Spring, U.S. Policy in the Middle East and the Catastrophes to Avoid. Walid, as always, it's great to get your take on these situations. Give us the latest from what you're hearing about what's happening right now in Israel and Gaza.
Thank you, John, for having me. The sources we are listening to from the region, even from inside Gaza and the West Bank, are telling us that those who are making the Hamas, they are the ones who are assessing the situation, when to stop, when not to stop, when to agree to go to Cairo, for example, to discuss the ceasefire. And so far, as you said in the introduction, there is no real decision by Hamas to stop at this point in time.
And of course, the important thing to remember here is the lack of direct coordination between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. Hamas is the wild card. They're unable to be contained even during a ceasefire here. But we've seen the reemergence of Egypt playing a very important role in trying to develop this ceasefire. This is something that Egypt has done for decades here. Do you see this as a positive development in the process, and that even though it seems like we're getting closer and closer to a ground war, in the long term, there might be a rational actor who can step in and have calmer heads prevail?
Unfortunately, since the events began, since the battle began, people or observers tend to forget, why did Hamas actually engage in this confrontation? Last time Hamas and Israel were at war was in 2012, and there was a ceasefire agreement which was signed under the auspices of Egypt, of then President Morsi, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood. The most important reason for Hamas to engage in this confrontation has nothing to do actually with Israel or with events inside Gaza. Ironically, it has to do with Egypt, because Hamas was the ally of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Brotherhood was toppled in Egypt. The Egyptian army was getting closer and closer in the Sinai Peninsula over the past few months, and they have detected that Hamas is involved in terrorism in Egypt, and they were about to issue, attorney generals in Egypt were about to issue warrants for arrests of leaders from Hamas. So the best way for Hamas to get away from this trap, from the Egyptian trap, was to wage a war against the Israelis. Because by doing so, then Egypt will stop, then the Arab world will side with Hamas, and the bad guy will become Israel, and Hamas's acts in Egypt will be forgotten or erased for the time being.
Well, Walid, besides traditional rocket fire, Israel claims to have shot down a drone just a few days ago. Where is Hamas getting the technology and support? I mean, is it from Iran meddling in this conflict?
Oh, there is little doubt that what Hamas is getting in terms of technology is from the Iranian regime. It's not even a secret. I mean, for many opportunities, the Iranians have tried to send ships filled with weapons and missiles. A few months ago, the Israelis stopped an Iranian ship sailing across the Red Sea into the Suez Canal, but before it gets to the Suez Canal, they stop them. Yes, the Iranian regime is supplying Hamas with all kinds of weapons. Now, for Hamas to use drones, that has been changing the equation with the Israelis. Drones means that they can fly to any part of Israel, and not just Israel. They could transfer this technology to other organizations in the region.
Yeah, that was a very surprising development, I think, for a lot of folks, Walid, earlier this week when we heard about that drone being shot down. But I also want to talk about what's, you mentioned Iran here, and on the sidelines of this, we have the discussions that John Kerry just wrapped up in Vienna with Javad Zarif, the foreign minister from Iran here. How much is this situation with what's going on in Gaza playing into those discussions? Of course, Kerry and Zarif supposed to be talking about nuclear weapons, but I think it's safe to say they're also talking, obviously, about what's taking place in Gaza. No?
Absolutely. I mean, the Iranians have many cards. They have the card of Iraq. They have the card in Syria, in Lebanon, and of course, being suppliers of weapons to Hamas, they surely can have an effect on Hamas' decision to continue to stretch that ceasefire. If you look at the whole region, the Iranians are trying to gain time. They don't want to surrender their program, their nuclear program. So they go back to Geneva and say, well, look what's happening in the region. I need few months to, to make my own decisions. And unfortunately, the Obama administration is giving them more time. I think now they're going to give them another few months.
Yeah.
For the Iranians to adapt.
So in your assessment here, this is a huge mistake to give the Iranians any more time. That deadline is supposed to be the 20th of July. It does not look like there's going to be anything substantial by that deadline. So you think it's a huge mistake for the administration to give the Iranians any more time on the nuke negotiations?
It was actually an initial mother of all mistakes to do the interim deal with the Iranians before making sure that there's a real reform inside Iran. Now they actually outmaneuvered us. The Iranians outmaneuvered Washington. Now they got those 6 months. What is important, John, is they got $1 billion. The public is not aware that the administration transferred $1 billion from Iranian frozen money, which was owned by the previous regime in Iran before 1979. So the Iranians got the money, got the time, did not deliver.
Well, let's go back to Israel, shall we? Where reports of militants breaching Israel from Gaza through a tunnel, the second such intrusion. What can you tell us about this latest approach?
Look, the Hamas leaders have said so on Arab TV, on their own media. They are going to continue to engage the Israelis and strike inside Israel. On the one hand, they use the drones and longer range missiles. And now these so-called commando suicide operations inside Israel, just to say that the Israelis cannot handle Hamas. They're trying to do a psychological warfare. They know these operations are not going to do much on the ground, but they want to send a signal to the Israeli public that Israel cannot actually defeat Hamas. That's the main idea here.
All right, Walid Phares, thanks for your insight. We'll check back in with you as the situation progresses here. There was that brief pause, but of course the violence continues in many ways. Still rockets being fired from Gaza by Hamas, and still no clear direction from Hamas on what they're going to do here. Dr. Walid Phares, the new book is called, or the book I should just say, The Lost Spring, right here, U.S. Policy in the Middle East and Catastrophes to Avoid. Great to have you, and thanks for Skyping in with us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Miranda, so as you heard from Walid Phares there, the real important thing to remember here is Egypt's role in all of this, and this is really maybe just a proxy war playing out between Israel and Hamas. Hamas seems to have limited options here as the situation progresses. So we'll look for maybe a more substantive ceasefire coming up.
Well, we can all hope, right?
Yes, we can, of course. Much more to come here on America's Forum. We're just getting started. 1 hour almost over. 2 more hours to go, plus more coverage throughout the day on Newsmax TV with Midpoint and the Steve Malzberg Show. Back with more here on America's Forum right after this.